Hello, I'm Marsha Huber, and I'm doing a seminar on who are the happiest accountants and why, and I will be giving you some advice on how to keep your talent. Let me give you a little background information. I'm an associate professor of accounting at Youngstown State University, and I consider myself an accounting educator, innovator, and happiness researcher. So let's get started. So who cares if you're happy at work? Well, the Harvard Business Review in 2012 did a feature on the value of happiness, how employee well-being drives profits. So this was the introduction to the business world of this concept of happiness. Then, in June 2016, my research was featured in the Journal of Accountancy on building the happy CPA. And that's what I'll be discussing today. So before I begin, let's just talk about who are the talented, because I've been asked often by professionals, how do we keep our talent? Well, I would like to make a suggestion that perhaps we should not focus so much on the most talented that in this normal distribution is on the edges, but maybe we should focus on the mass of CPAs that would make up this group. So that's a suggestion. Okay, so my question to you is, as far as the challenge in keeping the talented, I'm going to also talk a little bit about what companies are offering, what professionals want and need, and is there a misalignment? And that's what I'll end with after I present my research. But before I do, let me talk a little bit about what happiness is. Okay, Marty Seligman, who's the father of positive psychology, he was the president of the American Psychological Association and actually introduced psychologists to this idea. And he was the founder of the program I went to at University of Pennsylvania. He defined happiness in three ways. He defined it as the pleasurable life, the fulfilling life, and the meaningful life. Now, the pleasurable life would include temporal joy, something you might just have for a day or for a couple of hours, such as perhaps going out with friends or maybe going to a football game, and you have this joy and it's gone. We have another type of happiness called the fulfilling joy, satisfaction with life, and that is one of the elements or variables I'll be looking at in my research, and that's your overall life. And often that increases with age, where we might learn, we start thinking about life and deciding what's important for us. And then we have the meaningful life. And for people who are working, this is very important, and you will hear more about it as I go on with my webinar. But if you want to know more about positive psychology, Marty Seligman has a TED Talk with 3.7 million views, and here's a link. You can Google Marty Seligman, and you can pretty easily find that TED Talk. Now, here's another question I pose to you. Does the absence of unhappiness mean one is happy? And you might say, well, who cares about that? Well, this is important. Just because you're not unhappy doesn't necessarily mean you're happy. So one thing about positive psychology and what my research attempts to do is not just to look at, let's help those that are languishing or have perhaps mental illness, or people at the 0 point. Let's take people from the 0 point to the flourishing point and where people have mental health. So I'm going to talk about a real world example. Okay, a few years ago, I was speaking to Stephen Shipman, who's the former CEO of Grant Thornton, and we began talking about this idea of happiness. And the firm was making changes, and I asked him about retention. And I said, okay, with all these changes, have you seen a change in retention? And he said, no, not really. He actually said, no, sadly not. And later I sent a paper to Chipman, who passed it on to Mike McGuire, who's now the current CEO of Grant Thornton. And he read my paper, and he came up to me, and he said, I get what you're saying, and I'll talk about one of the elements of calling. And he said, but how do we keep? He says, I can see an accountant with calling. How do we keep them? And that is a question that I added to my survey. So this is just general knowledge, I believe, in accounting, that turnover rates are stubbornly high. These have not changed probably since I was young to today. We have high turnover at certain levels. as well as the response by the profession have been things like giving flex time, summer sabbaticals, and there has been some improvement in retention seen. In fact, there was a quote in one article that was in an article, I believe, in the Journal of Accountancy that said, the firm's flex policy kept me from quitting. My question to you, though, is this what we want? Do we want to just add policies to keep people from quitting? I believe my research will show you something different. Okay, so what I did is I created a survey, and I'll talk about the measures, and I had 2 data sets. I'll only be talking about the first data set today. There are 1,408 respondents with 1,101 usable surveys, and that was with accountants. Accountants, government accountants, management accountants, CPAs, mostly CPAs. I had another data set from the Ohio Department of Administrative Services, but I won't be talking about that in this webinar. Okay, these are the many measures that were in the survey. Satisfaction with life, which is the first type of happiness, or one of the types of happiness that Marty Seligman spoke about. Then I asked questions about mastery, and then meaning on the job. This is a very important, concept, is that there's 3 types of meaning that people find on their job. Some people feel their job is a calling. Some people are career building, and some people are of the attitude that it's just a job. And I'll talk about that later in this webinar as well. Then we look for the need something called the need for recovery. That's called temporary well-being. That's how you feel the first few hours when you get home from work. We have a measure called professional well-being. Then we have 8 questions on hope, job satisfaction questions, job retention. We also measure emotions. It's called the PANAS, Positive Affect, Negative Affect Survey. So we ask questions about that, demographics, and a few qualitative questions where I was getting at the idea of retaining talent. So I'm going to start with the predictors of 3 items. Number 1, the intent to quit. Number 2, job satisfaction. Number 3, temporary well-being. And then we'll look with what are the predictors of satisfaction with life. Okay, now you're going to see some things, and what these little stars mean are the significance. The more stars, the more significant that particular variable is. Now, you'll see something very interesting, that hope is significant, more significant when it comes to intent to quit or temporary well-being, and also significant when it comes to satisfaction with life. You might say, hope, that's a little unusual to measure. I'll talk about what that is and how important it is in a moment. Then you'll see 3 stars by a career orientation and calling orientation when it comes to an employee's intent to quit. You see it also coming up with job satisfaction. Then you see emotions. So we see how important emotions are when it comes to someone's intent to quit, when it comes to job satisfaction, and negative emotions when it comes to temporary well-being. That is, again, when someone gets home from work, how they feel. Then we see mastery pop in for job satisfaction. So this idea of mastering your skill set is important when it comes to job satisfaction. And we see gender pop in when it comes to temporary well-being. And what actually has happened, that there is an effect, what we call a gender effect, and women are more affected. Actually, there's a difference with women and their temporary well-being. Women have a more difficult time when they get home from work, according to my research. And then we see other things affecting intent to quit, which is job satisfaction, which we measure here, and temporary well-being, which we measure here. And then when we look for predictions of satisfaction in life, job satisfaction pops in, temporary well-being, mastery, hope, and calling. Okay, now I'll explain these areas and bring them back, but what I'm trying to do is for you to see what are these elements that make a difference. And they are not necessarily elements that you might have thought of. The only time we see the one, income, is job satisfaction. And that actually phases out over time. We found income to have an effect at the lower levels, but it phased out when we got to higher levels of income. Okay, so let's proceed. So let's talk a little bit about these positive emotions. And one question I get from people sometimes is, can you be too positive? Well, not according to the research. To to be too positive, you would have to give comments 12 to 1, a ratio of 12 to 1 to actually lose the positive impact of positive comments. The typical workplace ratio is 3.1 to help workers become productive. But look at this. So a manager can give a lot of positive comments to an employee before there is really no negative effect. And let me talk a little bit about meaning, because we saw meaning in here. Okay, these are the three types of meaning. Number one, job. Okay, these are people who are working for financial reward. And financial reward works for these people because what happens is these people enjoy life outside of work. Career. Many of you who are watching are in the career building stage of your life. And what you view is advancement as your reward. You take job very seriously in your responsibilities, and you probably would enjoy career building help. Now, one thing I want to mention for others that are trying to help people in this career stage is to realize that advancement is a reward. But the most powerful predictor of someone staying at their job is calling. People with a calling cannot imagine doing anything else. They think about their job driving, they think about it in the shower, and how they could solve problems. These so-called knowledge workers often set their own goals and work at their own pace. So some of you may have found your calling, and that is what McGuire, the current CEO, Grant Thornton, saw. And he felt that. He said, I can see those people who have a calling. And he asked, how can we keep them? So I think this is important for all of us, is to find our calling. Because when we have a calling and we find it, work no longer becomes work. We actually begin to enjoy what we do, and it actually can help us become healthier people, believe it or not. There are two studies on stress, or there's some studies on stress, that stress can be bad, but stress can also motivate us and be good. And so I think those that find their calling may feel some stress, but it actually builds them up. So some other things about meaning. Meaning affects many, many things. Work motivation, absenteeism, work behavior, engagement, job satisfaction, keep going on, personal fulfillment. So these are things that we all look for. And Amy Ruzanowski, if I said that correctly, she's at Yale, and she's the researcher that has looked into this in depth. And she found those with higher calling experienced higher life and job satisfaction and missed fewer days at work. Now, in addition to this idea of calling, and those with their calling will stay in their jobs longer, and those who are career-oriented probably have a higher intent to leave, this idea of hope. And this kind of surprised me. I threw this in just to test it and didn't think that it would become such a strong predictor of job satisfaction and intent to stay. But there's two parts to hope, actually. Number one, hope helps us set goals, but it's not enough to have goals. You also have to have pathways or finding ways to achieve those goals and believe you can achieve them. So for some of us, when we have hope, we see a good future. We envision a good future. Just think about the latest political campaign. What motivated people? Or think about Obama. Actually, hope was part of his campaign slogan. So this is important, that for people to be optimistic, for people to have positive emotions, they have to see a hopeful future. And again, they have to see the future, but they also have to see a way to get to that future. So how this relates to work is this. If somebody can see a hopeful future, let's say, an accounting firm, I see that I could become partner. They also have to see ways to get there. And I think for the millennial generation, much of the literature says that they're a little more impatient, but one of the factors is somebody has to show them how to get there. Okay. So in my sample, we have mainly CPA firms, local and regional. We have some educators. We have some Ohio Society helped gather some opinions from younger folks, and I got a lot through social media, mostly management accountants. So we have a varied set. I can't tell you how many Big Four accountants we had. We did have some, and they came through social media. But I just want to let you know where the sample came from. Okay, so I'm going to talk about 4 indicators. To our question, satisfaction in life. Who are the happiest accountants? Well, look at this, the not-for-profit accountants. Then we come to regional CPA firms, education firms, local CPA firms. Then we come to manufacturing, banking, and who's at the lowest level? Big Four CPA firms. That's with overall satisfaction with life. Some things are going to change now, though. Look what happened here. Who has the highest job satisfaction? Remember, not-for-profit was here with satisfaction in life, and Big Four was here with satisfaction in life, but it's changed. With job satisfaction, not-for-profit came down here, and Big Four moved up here. But once again, we see the regional CPA firms here as far higher for job satisfaction, according to my research. Then it flips, of course, with intention to quit. These are the people who plan to stay. These are the people who plan to leave. And we have government here, and Big Four here. And then who are the ones the least likely to quit are your local and regional CPA firms. And of course, here we have some educators. And here's something else, satisfaction with life by person, by the individual. So we'll see, and this is very common, partners and directors at top, as well as our interns, are very happy. And we see our staff and our managers and our seniors at this end. And job satisfaction. Again, we see directors and senior managers here as far as job satisfaction, and we'll see our supervisors, our seniors, kind of going down here, and for whatever reason, our interns. Now, when it comes to intent to quit, which I think is important, who are the ones who are most likely to lose? I don't think I'm telling anyone this. I don't think this is a big surprise. Again, our seniors, our lower level people, because why? They're looking to move up in their career. And we see our partners and our principals and our directors here. They don't plan to quit. They plan to stay. Of course they do. And then how about temporary well-being? This is how you feel when you get home. Again, we see partners and principals. Higher up you are, the more relaxed you are at home. The lower you are, the less relaxed you are at home. Okay, these are a lot of slides. So let me just sum these up for you. So what do we see happening here? So when it comes to life and satisfaction with life, we see that the higher up you are, the higher job satisfaction, the higher satisfaction with life, the happier you are, and the more likely you are willing to stay in your current position. The lower you are, the less satisfaction you have, the more likely you are to quit, and you're not as satisfied with life, and you're not as satisfied with your job. And you know what? I think that's okay. And I think the importance of this is to present you, if you're down there in the career building part of your career, to say, hey, it's coming. It may not come fast enough for you, but it's coming. You know, this satisfaction, this well-being at home, et cetera, et cetera. And I think a part of it, which I do not have on my slides, is autonomy and calling. And as you move in your career, what you find out is you end up in the job that you want. You end up being able to mold your own job. If you like tax, or if you like auditing, or let's say even management accounting, we find the same results even with people in management accounting. The higher up you are, the higher job satisfaction, et cetera, that you have. So here we go. Here's a summary. We see those people with a calling orientation. They're happy all the way around. If you're in your calling, you're happy at life, you're happy at your job, you plan to stay at your job. Unfortunately, when you're career building, you have lower. It doesn't mean you're depressed. I'm just making these faces just to give you a kind of representation of what I'm saying. Okay, it's tough when you're career building. And I think it's important to let people know that, you know, this is normal. It's normal to, you know, experience stress when you're career building and maybe not be happiest in life. but it's going to change. And if you're job-oriented, meaning that, hey, you know what? I just go to my job, I make a good living, and I have fun. Okay, you got life satisfaction, but you may not be too happy on your job. Okay, so I also want to talk a little bit about what we call qualitative analysis, which we ask people how they found or what kinds of meaning they found on their jobs. Here's a few comments. We found some accountants who didn't find any meaning in their job. I'm an accountant, I'm not saving lives or impacting society in any way. I help my company make and keep profits. How rewarding can that be? So here's a person who finds little meaning in work. But this was the minority by far. A lot of accountants found a lot of meaning in their jobs, and they felt they were making a difference. For example, I feel like I'm impact business directly, I enjoy my career, and I feel like I'm helping my company and people as a whole. My work makes a difference with our customers, our employees, and our society in general. Work is an important part of my life, maybe too important. I would have a hard time finding things to do if I didn't work. So we found many other comments where people like working with their clients. They like working for their company. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what our participants said would help make them a happier employee, which might help you, those who have influence on keeping your talent. Number one, what we saw was improved communications. That many of the participants wrote something, they wanted better communications, better descriptions of what they were to do, more help on their job assignments, setting priorities, etc., feedback. Number two, some people wanted more pay, and that was a factor in job satisfaction, and especially with the job-oriented people. And recognition, this was big. Many of our participants, they wanted more respect. They just wanted appreciation. They wanted to feel that they were appreciated by their superiors for the kind of work and the volume of the work. They also wanted more perks, just small things to brighten their day, such as treats or get-togethers. So those are three elements for those trying to retain talent to focus on: communications, pay, recognition. But I have some other suggestions. Then I suggest maybe there's a little mismatch. And that mismatch might be that the CPA firms are offering flex time, sabbaticals, job sharing, telecommuting, and these items. And these kind of help job-oriented folks. But what about helping the career-oriented folks? Or what about helping those find their calling? And I think there's a little bit of a mismatch. So some of my recommendations are this. From the study, overall, is number one, besides those things I mentioned before, is to cast a vision of what is to come and build hope in your organization. And for those who are watching this, think about hope. Think about that vision and look for the vision for the future and look for ways to get there. And truly, if you want to keep your people, if some other firm comes along and presents a more hopeful future, people will go with that. Another thing, use incentives to support career and calling orientations, not just job orientations, as I mentioned previously. Consider how incentives change over career progression, that as people move through their careers, they need different types of incentives, not the same one. Help CPAs find meaning in their jobs, because we find that to be a strong predictor of job satisfaction and intent to stay. And lastly, perhaps rework mentoring programs. I know there's been a move to have mentoring, but as I spoke to young CPAs, they really didn't feel those programs were working very well, and also people needed training on how to mentor. Thanks for watching, and if you have any questions, my information is on the screen. Thanks again.